I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Just wait for everybody to take a seat real quick.
On Monday, January 16th, Bucknell professor Marcellus Andrews wrote an open email to the Bucknell community addressing his concerns about discrimination on campus in light of the rise of Donald Trump to the White House. In his email, the professor specifically singled out the conservative libertarian students at Bucknell, calling us racist and fascist for arranging a guest lecture event that occurred almost a year ago. Alarmingly, Professor Andrews claimed that the students who felt targeted by last February's speaker needed to, quote, be able to impose a steep and lasting price on the racists and fascists that organized the event. In the same email, Andrews claimed that in his younger days, when he was extremely skilled at combat,
he would respond to fascists and racists by rearranging their faces and snapping their bones in order to change their minds. As conservative and libertarian students, we believe that Professor Andrews deserves the intellectual space and academic freedom to say and write what he pleases. But we believe instructing students to impose a steep and lasting price on students for organizing a guest lecture event isn't protected by the same academic freedom that we fight for. Although I don't believe this professor was instructing students to use violence as a tactic against me or my conservative and libertarian peers, his email could have easily been interpreted in such a way. After I politely asked Professor Andrews, who I've never met, in an email to explain what he meant by, quote, impose a steep and lasting price, he claimed my doing so had confirmed for him his suspicion that there was a collaboration between, quote, students who hate dark folks and the Bucknell faculty. But what was Professor Andrews so alarmed about? Was our event truly racist or fascist? That night, the speaker argued that, quote, there was stuff left to do in America on race. African Americans are still owed something. Then, speaking much like an intersectional feminist, the speaker addressed the struggles faced particularly by African American females, who he suggested are on the receiving end of cross-sectional institutional discrimination. Just a few weeks ago, this same speaker condemned white nationalists, arguing that you should focus on what unites people and not what drives them apart. You shouldn't give a crap about skin color. You shouldn't give a crap about sexuality. You shouldn't give a crap about gender, and you should be deeply suspicious of the people who do. What was perhaps more alarming than Professor Andrews' conduct in this email to me was the administration's response. In a meeting held with the administration, an administrator refused to call Professor Andrews' conduct inappropriate, choosing instead to say that the administration would have preferred that he had used different language. The administration accepted Professor Andrews' cheap explanation that by, quote, impose a steep and lasting price, he merely meant that marginalized students were to engage me in calm and peaceful discussion. The administration's response confirmed for me that conservative and libertarian students won't be protected from mistreatment as long as that mistreatment is delivered in the name of social justice. I want to be clear. Professor Andrews' conduct and the university's weak response is not acceptable. I will do everything in my power to ensure that every living conservative and libertarian Bucknellian and their wallets know that our university finds Professor Andrews' ugly public threat to be an acceptable form of conduct for our faculty. I have never met Professor Andrews. I've never sat in his classroom. Because of this, in a sense, Professor Andrews has become the monster he has spent his life hoping to destroy. As an African American, Professor Andrews has probably faced a lifetime of discrimination, but this provides him no justification to pass a collective judgment on me and my peers based upon the political beliefs that we hold. The incident with Professor Andrews certainly isn't the first of its kind. In a recent survey of over 2,000 Yale students, over 75% of those surveyed agreed that Yale does not provide a welcoming environment for conservative students to share their opinions on political issues. In the past few weeks, violence has erupted at several guest lecture events around the country featuring moderate, conservative, and libertarian speakers. Vice co-founder Gavin McInnes was pepper sprayed before an event in which he was set to speak at NYU. Violent riots erupted at UC Berkeley last week in response to an event featuring the same speaker we had here on this stage last February. There is a concern on this campus on the faces that you don't see, in the corners of this campus that you don't visit. It is in those corners where you will find those of us that constantly have our moralities brought into question in the classroom by our peers, friends, and family for daring to believe that the state shouldn't be used as an apparatus to cure society's injustices. Conservative and libertarian students can't argue against the passage of a $15 minimum wage law without being considered cold and unfeeling. Despite the volumes of economic research that makes the reasonable case that a $15 minimum wage would actually hurt low-skilled workers by pricing them out of the labor market, it's the unflinching arrogance of campus leftists that would allow them to skip the debate on the issue and go right to labeling their detractors as selfish and cold-hearted cynics who would rather people die in the streets then force employers to put a few extra dollars in their employees' pockets. Because of this lack of intellectual freedom, Bucknellians only speak non-progressive thoughts in hushed tones, behind closed doors, and under the assumption that everything said stays between the two parties of a politically incorrect conversation. In an email addressed to the Bucknell community, a professor smeared and gave explicit instructions that students should lash out at me and my conservative and libertarian peers for inviting a guest speaker that brought a strong anti-racist message to campus. And although the administration addressed the incident quickly, their repeated refusal to call Professor Andrews' conduct inappropriate speaks volumes about the disdain that they have for Bucknellians that don't submit to our campus's progressive orthodoxy. This attitude, that conduct that would otherwise be considered unacceptable if not done in the name of social justice, presents a dangerous, slippery slope. Just last week, the protesters at UC Berkeley seemingly took the advice of Professor Andrews and elected to rearrange the faces and snap the bones of students waiting in line to hear the same speaker we had here on the stage last February. Student attendees were beaten with flagpoles, punched, bruised, and pepper sprayed. Windows were broken. A UC Berkeley administrator allegedly bragged on social media about punching an attendee. Despite the violence, only one arrest was made. Influential comedy film producer Judd Apatow celebrated the violence at Berkeley, claiming that this was only the beginning. I'm often told that I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, that it's not possible for a member of a demographic group that is not traditionally considered to be marginalized to be discriminated against in the university. But Professor Andrews' conduct and the administration's response has proved to me otherwise. The violence at Berkeley and the inaction of the police in arresting the organizers and perpetrators of the violence has convinced me otherwise. A slate of editorials released by the independent student newspaper of UC Berkeley, the Daily Californian, entitled "Violence is Self-Defense," not only justified the violence, but even claimed that it was necessary to protect student safety from ideas. It should be a concern for us all that some of our nation's brightest students attending one of our nation's best public universities, the same university that gave birth to the free speech movement, believes that violence is an acceptable response to an inflammatory guest speaker. This is what helps to create white identitarian groups, white supremacist groups. Both the legal system and our institutions, our universities, setting different standards of expected decency for people based on the way that they look or the political beliefs that they hold. My time as a student activist is coming to a close. Above all else, I've learned in these 4 years that the American political landscape is in desperate need of individuals who have the capacity to bring us together and remind us of our common humanity, regardless of race, gender identity, sexuality, or political persuasion. As Bucknellians, we should all strive to be this kind of person. Tonight, we continue the practice of promoting intellectual diversity at Bucknell by welcoming Christina Hoff Sommers. Christina is an author, former philosophy professor, and a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a conservative think tank. Sommers is known for her critique of contemporary feminism, and her works include the books Who Stole Feminism?, The War Against Boys, and her writing has been featured in a variety of different media outlets, including the New York Times, Time Magazine, The Atlantic, and she also hosts a very popular video blog called The Factual Feminist. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Christina Hoff Sommers.
Oh, I'm sort of behind this. Can I move this? Rearranging the furniture here. Factual Feminist, reporting to duty. I am very happy to be here this evening. And I want to thank the Young Americas Foundation for sponsoring this event and the Bucknell College conservatives, libertarians, free thinkers. I recently spoke at Portland State University, and activists were sending out sort of frantic notices that they were going to protest, and more ominously, a group of outside agitators, not students, but they were called the Portland Anti-Fascists. They announced they were going to sabotage the event. Now, at the last minute, they changed their mind. Something bigger came up. I think they heard Milo was speaking in the next state, and they left Portland and did not attend. But some protesters came nevertheless. And as I went in to meet my host, who was a philosophy professor, he was surrounded with 6 sort of big guys, and he told me that these were coaches and instructors from his martial arts academy in Portland, and they were going to be my bodyguards. And he said, these guys are packing more power, than a team of Navy SEALs, so you're fine. And I said, why do I need this? And he said, you need it. This is Portland. But it's not only Portland. Everywhere I speak these days, the administration provides a police detail. And at Cal State LA, there was even an ambulance on hand. Now, I have been speaking on campuses for many years. There were never ambulances and police details and bodyguards. So the question is, what's going on? I first became aware of a change on the campus in 2015 when I spoke at Oberlin, Georgetown, and UMass Boston. I host a weekly, ideally a weekly video blog called The Factual Feminist, where I spend most of my time correcting what I see as feminist myths and mistakes and bogus statistics. I consider myself a feminist, but I am persuaded women are helped by truth, not hype, not spin, no matter how well intended. But the gender activists at Oberlin, Georgetown, UMass, they objected to my criticisms of their deeply held beliefs and considered my challenge to be triggering. And at UMass, as I was speaking, a young woman kept screaming, F you, F you, and there were several hecklers in the audience who wouldn't allow me to speak. At Oberlin, they organized safe spaces where students could flee from what one Oberlin professor had called my discursive violence. In fact, at Oberlin, 30 women and a therapy dog fled to a safe space during my talk. And I triggered a dog. I'm sorry about that. Now, banning and threatening speakers, it's now common on the college campus. So is monitoring and policing speech, humor. Comedians are now hesitate to go to many campuses. And a new vocabulary has emerged of trigger warnings and microaggressions and safe spaces. The organization FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, it's a bipartisan civil rights organization, and they keep track of violations of free speech on campus. And I urge you to go to their website. Now, some of it is against left-wing students, but the vast majority are against conservative students. And it's now not on all campuses, and I'm sure Bucknell is an admirable exception, but on many campuses, it's just not a safe space for speech, for free expression. Free speech, due process, and other liberal ideals, these are at risk. And I once, and I could give you a lot of examples, and we could laugh at them. Some of them are funny, some of them are heartbreaking. But instead of laughing at them, I want to explore why are left-wingers on campus doing this? Why this move towards monitoring speech and speech codes? And on many campuses, FIRE, just the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, just put out a report about what they're called bias response teams. And if you're on campus and there's an incidence of bias, you can report it to this commission that includes police officers. I mean, how did this come to be? And if you look what they're reporting, I mean, we can all think of cases of frightening incidents of racism or anti-Semitism on campus, but they're reporting jokes. They're reporting somebody made a penis out of ice, an ice sculpture. I mean, many of these things. Some of them simply would report that a professor gave some conservative opinions. This is all very dismaying to me as a philosophy professor of many years, and one of my favorite philosophers, John Stuart Mill, in his book On Liberty. And what has happened to that, and is it being taught, and what forces are creating this? Now, if you ask some of those who are promoting safe spaces, wanting to come down on people for microaggressions, what would they say? Well, I've read a number of attempted justifications, and I'll just summarize it for you, what they seem to be saying. And then I'll evaluate it. It would go something like this. Pathologies like racism, sexism, transphobia, these are deeply ingrained in American society. And on the college campus, there are growing numbers of students who are just not going to put up with it anymore. Free speech and other liberal ideals, they have mainly benefited the powerful. So safe spaces and trigger warnings, etc., these are ways of empowering marginalized people, giving them a voice, giving them a shot at liberty. And if someone comes to your campus spreading hatred or they want to justify the old system of exclusion, yeah, they'll be disinvited, they'll be heckled. That's the price for progress. So that's Jessica Valente, for example, is a well-known feminist writer, and she gave an argument like that in The Guardian about a year ago. And she ended her article by saying, we're not stopping free speech, we're making speech better. And I saw an NYU law school student on a panel about free speech, and she said, what we're doing is building a society where we don't hurt one another. Now, I happen to agree with the goals of ridding our society of sexism, misogyny, other forms of bigotry. I hope all of you do too. And I don't want people to be hurt. But I am convinced that the campus activists are going about it the wrong way. And I think they're doing more harm than good. I don't think they're achieving their goals. What they are doing is turning our campuses into hostile environments for reason and for freedom. Now, before I go any further, I just want to tell you a brief word about my background. Way back in the last century, in the early 1990s, I was a feminist academic in good standing. I was invited to feminist conferences and asked to review papers for feminist journals. My courses at Clark University were cross-listed with women's studies. That all changed when I published a book in 1994 called Who Stole Feminism? That book was feminist. I am a strong believer in classical equality feminism. But I argued that, or let me put it this way, I rejected the idea that American women were oppressed. For the most part, I said equality feminism, it was a great success story. By the 1990s, American women were among the freest, most liberated in the world. Yes, there were still challenges. Yes, there were still inequities. But to speak of American society as a patriarchy or to refer to American women as second-class citizens, that seemed to me to be ridiculous, unsustainable. And I gave a lot of arguments about why I thought so. Now, when my book first came out, some prominent feminists agreed with me. Feminism is diverse. There are many different schools, and there are one school of sort of libertarian feminists and more classically liberal feminists. I got some fan letters from Nadine Strawson. She was then president of the ACLU. I got a very nice letter from Erica Jong, who was a sort of pro-sex feminist, a novelist, and wrote Fear of Flying. But for the most part, the feminist establishment was displeased, and I was quickly subjected to a colorful array of attacks for my heresies. Many feminist leaders were convinced that professors and activists were convinced that the United States is an oppressive patriarchy. They did not appreciate my pleas for moderation, and I was called a backlasher, a traitor to my gender, anti-woman. One angry critic even referred to Christina Hoff Sommers and Margaret Thatcher, those two female impersonators, a non-woman. Now, by the way, someone called me that recently, a female impersonator, a non-woman. They called me that on Tumblr, and they were quickly called out by someone who said that was the wrong word to use. I think they said the proper word is differently gendered. Well, I'm not, I don't think I'm differently gendered. I'm an age-enhanced woman, philosophy professor, and I think that it's my penchant for logic and reason and rules of evidence that got me in trouble. And by the way, I should tell you, just as an aside, this has not been easy for my mother and father. I lost my father a few years ago, but my mother's still with me, and my parents. You can't be more liberal than my parents. They are so liberal, and when my dad was liberal, and they're dismayed to find their daughter caught in all of these controversies and sometimes reviled by people they admire and admired by those whom they regard as diabolical. And my father used to listen to Rush Limbaugh on the radio just to get angry. And my mother would say, turn him off, and it's not good for your blood pressure, And Daddy would, okay, turn it off. And as soon as Mom wasn't in the car, he'd turn it on and get really mad at Rush. And one day, Rush Limbaugh, he hadn't read my book, but he made all sorts of assumptions, and he said, well, I think I like this woman, Christina Hoff Sommers. And my dad almost lost control of the car. And on one occasion, even though my parents were very worried about what I was writing, they always, especially my dad, was a loyal fan. Whatever I wrote, whatever I did, he wanted to read it. He was happy. And I was once interviewed by Playboy magazine. And my dad was eager to get a copy of the interview. But what do you do when you're an 82-year-old man in Vermont? They were living there at the time. We're all from California, but they're living in Vermont. California wasn't liberal enough. They had to go there. And in Vermont, he felt a little embarrassed about going to the store and buying Playboy. So he drove over to New Hampshire, to the more libertarian Keene, less puritanical than Vermont, where nobody knew him. And he was a little embarrassed. He felt he had to explain himself. And he said he was buying Playboy. And he said, I'm only buying this because my daughter's in it. Anyway, back to my topic about what's gone wrong on campus. How do we explain this new era of repression? Maybe that's an overstatement. Maybe it's turning around. I hope so. But what I saw last week when Milo Yiannopoulos was speaking at Berkeley, what I've experienced on campuses. Now, here's why I'm very worried. I'm not only worried about the antics and the fighting and the intolerance, even the ideas. And these ideas have bothered me for a long time. And let's just go back. I think to understand the trigger warning, safe space, victim-focused theories on campus, it helps to go back to see some of the roots and where this got started. Now, my first experience was in 1992 when I attended the annual meetings of the National Women's Studies Association in Austin, Texas. Now, what I saw there does not reflect all of women's studies. As I said, there are many different schools of thought, but the women that were gathered there in 1992, intersectional feminism was in vogue there. Today it's in vogue all over the campus, but it was starting to take hold in the Women's Studies Association. And as soon as I arrived at this conference, by the way, I wasn't there to participate. I was writing an article about the state of feminist scholarship on campus. I was writing it for The Atlantic, and I thought this would be an interesting place to go, and it was. On the first day, participants were told to break up into groups based on their grievance identities. And what happened was there were groups of Asian American women, African American women, old women, Jewish women, disabled women, fat women. None of these groups proved stable. The fat women polarized into a gay and straight faction. Members of the black lesbian group couldn't get along because some of them had white partners, and that was supposed to have given them privilege. They had to form their own group. New identities emerged. A group of women with allergies formed, and they set demands. We were not supposed to wear dry clean clothing or hairspray, and they were very agitated. it was a group of scholars, but we didn't resolve differences through rational discussion. Instead, intersectionality, at least at that conference, created new reasons for anger. It just devoured itself. By the way, I ended up bonding with a group of radical lesbian separatists. I don't share their identity or their politics, but they all smoked, and I needed a cigarette at the end. I'm not a smoker, but it was absolutely traumatizing just to see these antics. Now, some of these scholars at the conference, they went back to their universities, and they've been, for the last 20 years or so, they've been writing articles and starting programs, task force, working groups. They have a set of advocacy statistics to complement their grievance theories. And you may have heard, 1 in 4 women will be raped, 1 in 3 battered, women cheated out of 25% of their salary. And that's only if they're not dead from an eating disorder that they developed in response to patriarchal standards of beauty. Now, what I thought when I wrote Who Stole Feminism, what I think now is that sexual assault, workplace discrimination, domestic violence, eating disorders, these are serious problems. And they require intelligent solutions, sober analysis. But what I find in reviews of women's studies textbooks and fact sheets over the years is that at the heart of campus feminism, it seems to me, is a body of dubious information and a mix of untruths and exaggeration and creating a kind of panic today. Now let me give you an example. Take something like the wage gap. How many times have you heard that for the same work, a woman is paid 77 cents on the dollar, and 70 cents for what a man's paid $1? Now, that is misleading because, just think about it. If employers could save 23% by hiring women, they'd fire all the men. That would have happened. The gap is just the difference between the average wages of all working men and women. It ignores factors that justify differential pay, type of job, education, hours worked per week. When these factors are taken into account, the gender gap narrows to the point of vanishing. Depends on the study, but sometimes they'll find a few cents they can't account for. It could be discrimination. As an equity feminist, I want to know if it is, but it could be something else. We don't know. But I never find it, so far, in my review of campus literature and the major women's organizations, I never find it discussed that way. It's almost always presented as an injustice practiced against women. And a few years ago, this became my most famous tweet. It was called Offend a Student Day or something, and I just said, if you want to close the wage gap, step 1, change your major from feminist dance therapy to electrical engineering. And if you look at that tweet, it has like 25,000 likes, but not everybody who read it liked it because there are long comments, a lot of comments underneath it. And they're saying, no, even when women, and if you look, I put it as my signature tweet, on top, and so it's still, you can find it there. And then it's an endless, and I've interacted with people, I'm happy to, and they'll say to me, no, even if women became petroleum engineers, they earn less. And that is true, but then what you have to do is look at women petroleum engineers, and compare hours worked per week, willingness to move to North Dakota, and you just find that there almost always a reasonable explanation for the differential. And for example, someone on Twitter said to me, male nurses earn more than female nurses, same profession, and even a traditional women's profession. It isn't that, and they find it especially outrageous that male nurses earn more. But the fact is, male nurses go into, on average, I've read some very good analyses of male and female nurses, and the male nurses tend to go into the higher paying specialties. They dominate in nurse anesthesiology. They work longer hours. They disproportionately find jobs in cities with the highest compensation. Now, activist groups and my Twitter followers, they have an answer to that. They'll say, well, the reason, women can't move to these places and they can't work longer hours, so there's still a gender issue here. And they're driven by, this was the National Organization for Women. It said that there's this deeper injustice, that women are driven by powerful, sexist stereotypes and to take on these professions or take all the burdens of childhood. Now, that's true, but if it's because women are having children, then it's not because they're being cheated out of their salary. It's because they're going into different fields and they have different life priorities. I'm not saying there aren't things we could do, but the wage gap isn't just women being cheated out of whatever they say. Women earn only 77 cents, 78 cents an hour. That's not an accurate way to present it. And if you say, well, if you look at majors, like at this school, if you just looked at what people are majoring, if this school is typical, you would find that computer science and economics, you'll have more men, and women, you have far more in the in English and in psychology, sociology, education. I find it strange to say that women are kind of pushed into those fields. That might have been the case 20, 30 years ago, but today women, especially American college women, are among the most free and self-determining people, and they're choosing to go into fields that interest them. I don't see how we can say, it's 2016, and American women, I just hesitate to say that our life choices, that we're making them, it seems to be divorced from reality. And recently on PBS, they had a program, Freakonomics, and they interviewed this brilliant economist, Claudia Golden, from Harvard University. And she said a lot of things I said, that most of the wage gap can be explained. She said that even if we switched and men did all the women's job and women did the men's job, she thinks that there would still be a wage gap favoring men. And she said, we haven't understood it. And it's too complicated to go into her explanation, but it had to do with basically jobs. The biggest gaps are in jobs where there's a huge premium for being able to work weird hours and long hours in law firms and financial firms and so forth. And there's where the big gap is. Even in medicine, male doctors work many more hours. And she had some interesting ideas on what we could do. She wasn't sure what would work, but she agrees with me. It is a problem that women earn less, but let's analyze it properly. It's not just like employers are cheating women out of their salary and everybody's angry. No, it's actually a different problem. And I just urge you to listen to that program. And anyway, I don't want to keep going on about the wage gap, but this is what gets me in trouble, is bringing these things up. And or take the idea, I'll just move on to another idea. I'll come back to the wage gap later, because I know there's more to say. But it's more complicated. I've never seen it presented this way in women's studies textbooks. It's usually just a given that women are, there's this wage discrimination. Look at something like male privilege. Is it really the case that men are so much better off than women in American society? I think modern society is a complicated mix of burdens and advantages for each sex. Women are assumed to be the have-nots, because there's a massive lobby that devotes itself to proving Venus is worse off than Mars. But Mars affliction, those go unnoticed. I'll just mention a few. Most of the of the back-breaking, lethally dangerous jobs in our society, roofer, logger, roustabout, coal miner, just to name a few, these are done by men. And the Labor Department reports that about 5,000 Americans die in the workplace each year. 90%, or about 4,400, are men. We always hear that only 24 women are CEOs of the Fortune 500. That's a problem, I agree. But what about the unfortunate 4,400 men? It's almost as if you have to look at the whole society. There are a very elite group of men who are highly privileged, but if you look at men across, the whole spectrum, socioeconomic spectrum, it's a different picture. Look at education. Education beyond high school has been called the passport to the American dream. Increasingly, women have it, men don't. From the earliest grades, our schools do a better job of educating and motivating girls. And now women earn the majority of college degrees and advanced degrees. And the intersectionalist narrative, tells us that males, especially white males, they're the most in need of atoning for their privilege. But recent government data shows that now Hispanic and Native American women are more likely to go to college than white men. Now, yes, just go to the Department of Education and look at the data. There has been an amazing success story among Hispanic women, and no one talks about it. It's still as if, men are held back and women are ahead. They've mostly, 2 years, Pew Research has a good story about it, and they show the Hispanic women, a few percentages ahead of white men, taken as a group. But this year they were only one percentage point ahead, but they have caught up or they're ahead, and this is the scene in education. But it seems to me that our women's lobby deploys this faulty logic. In cases where men are better off than women, that's injustice. Where women are doing better, well, that's just life, I think that if Mars needs to check his privilege, so does Venus. But mostly, why play this game? Why are so many activists out to promote divisiveness? I think that men and women, we're not two opposing teams competing for a single trophy. We're in this together. Now, today on the campus, the fashion is intersectional feminism. And according to intersectional feminism, pathologies like racism, sexism, classism, ableism, these are not separate systems. They connect, they overlap, they create complex arrangement of advantages and burdens. Now, if this were simply a recommendation, if intersectionality were simply an approach for social scientists or social activists, urging them to consider diversity of opinion, diversity of perspective, and to attend to marginalized people, that would be well and good. That would be fine. I have no quarrel with that. I am concerned with intersectional feminism as it is being taught and practiced on many college campuses. Now, this theory, which is sort of official doctrine in many gender studies programs, it portrays American society as to use their expression, matrix of domination and oppression. And by the way, the list of oppressions keeps growing. Bell Hooks, a prominent gender theorist and intersectional theorist, she has referred to the United States as an imperialist, capitalist, white supremacist patriarchy. And actress Laverne Cox, who's a frequent campus lecturer, she expanded Hooks' formulation in a tweet. She said, actually, it's a cisnormative, heteronormative, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. And others have added an ableist and lookist and pro-natalist and sizist. And there are a lot of ists and isms going on. Now, if you buy into this theory, as presented by some of its prominent theorists, you why would you worry about the niceties of politeness, civility, free expression? I mean, you're on an urgent mission to dismantle a relentless and lethal system of oppression. And why be respectful to invited speakers, who are little or more than, agents of the dominant narrative? Tear down their posters or screech obscenities at their talks, and if some white cisgendered guy on campus tries to dispute what you have to say by using logic and reason, tell him to check his privilege and stop mansplaining and shut the F up. And that happens on many campuses. I have problems with this theory, many problems, and I made a Factual Feminist on the topic, but here's what bothers me most. First of all, I don't see the United States as a matrix of oppression. We're a flawed democracy. But for most Americans, it's a matrix of freedom and opportunity. And much of the world sees the United States that way. And then if you're going to say we're so terrible, show us a place where it's better. And yeah, you could point to Northern European countries, but those countries are not nearly have as large a population and as a diverse a population as ours. I'm not saying that we're perfect. We're far from perfect. We are flawed. But it seems to me underlying intersectionality is this very dark, unreal picture of the United States. And it seems to give permission. A part of the theory says that oppressed groups have a kind of privileged epistemology. They have a way of seeing the world and that gives them more insight into justice and well-being, and one should listen. And so that has turned into an idea to tell other people to check their privilege and listen. I don't think that you determine who has to listen or who has to check their privilege based on someone's race or gender or sexual preference. You go by the individual. What has happened in this system, what bothers me most is they're fighting racism and sexism by classifying everybody according to race and sex. That's not going to work. If you want to fight bigotry and sexism, focus on universal rights. Focus on our common humanity. What's happening is that the intersectionality on some campuses is breaking us up into warring identity groups. And as I said, we have these proliferating ists and isms. It's turning many of our campuses into hostile environments for friendship. Students are organizing themselves into aggrieved little tribes that police and bully one another for imagined slights and micro-invalidations. What happened at that women's conference in 1992, it's now happening on the campus. This is not deep liberation. This is not a more exalted and inclusive freedom. I don't see progress. I see folly. Now, it doesn't have to be this way. And that brings me back to my free speech event in Portland. It actually went very well, and I did not need the services of those 6 mixed martial arts experts. I'm very happy to report that in this, this was anarcho-vegan hipster intersectional protest capital of the world, Portland. 400 people came together. We did not all agree, but we managed to have a civil discussion. And some of the students who came to protest, initially they were jeering and, heckling the speakers, but soon then they listened, and I guess in the end, many of them stayed and joined the discussion. Now, at the very end of the event, this fellow on rollerblades rolled up to me. He skated up to me to say thank you. And he said that he had actually come to protest, but he'd enjoyed the discussion. By the way, he also had a mohawk, and I think he was wearing a cape. But in these riotous times right now, this event at Portland State University told me that we can still speak to one another as equals. We can respect one another's right to speak, to listen, to disagree. And if that can happen in Portlandia, it can happen in Bucknell, it can happen anywhere. Thank you.
It's almost 8 o'clock, so why don't we take some questions for you?
Okay.
I saw some people furiously taking notes, so I'm sure there are some.
Oh.
You know what? Justin, can you pass the microphone around and flip it on? Can you flip the switch on? Because I think it's off.
Thanks, Andrew.
Is this, hello? Okay. So thank you for coming and speaking with us. So I wanted to sort of address your approach when you sort of align yourself with reason and calm and charge dissenters with being hyperbolic, speaking untruths, exaggerating, having antics, and you say no matter how well-intentioned, such things are not good, and they're not progressive, they're not going to actually help us towards our social justice ends, which you share with feminists and others, right? But yet, then you said, everywhere I go, there are protests, there's police duty, there's bodyguards. Are there...
No, this is wonderful.
This is the only place where you've gone.
This year, I mean, I said it's only started happening since two. Uh-oh.
But they're at every event. Is this your bodyguard right here?
I got him right here.
Oh, the front row is the bodyguard.
I'm delighted, and I'm actually thinking that nobody tore down my posters.
No. I'm a professor. I encourage my students to come.
There are two possibilities. Things may be changing and calming down because I think people were a little shocked by what's been going on other campuses, or it just may be that Bucknell is an island of sanity.
Well, really? Do you all feel that Bucknell is an island of sanity? I mean, I think that's highly unlikely. But so that was my question about your approach. But I also wanted to ask you about something related. You referred to John Stuart Mill, and the idea behind On Liberty is the harm principle,
right,
as you know. And some of the speech that we're talking about is harmful and incites violence. Some of what Tom spoke about is his concern about that. So I'm wondering where you stand on that, and also on the question of intersectional feminism. My understanding of that view is that the world is a matrix of oppression and privilege. That it's not just oppression that we're talking about, that everyone's standing, right now I'm a woman and a white person, and I have a lot of different privileges and points where I'm oppressed because of those identities. So that's not exactly how you represented intersectional feminism.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned the video, because I do go into that a lot about privilege and burdens. And I even say there are forms of it that I admire. And I think the original impulse was very legitimate. There were African American women who were not represented in the discourse of feminism, and that was wrong. But what's happened is I think it's evolved into a kind of victim Olympics. And with more and more groups coming in, and this idea of even reducing someone or thinking you can know that much about someone because of their a member of these identity groups. I think. But
the point is that everyone's a member of many identities, and we can't know much about someone by knowing one thing about them. That's the point.
We can't.
Right, but it's not about, okay, you're a woman, and now I deal with you as a woman. It's that you're not just a woman. You're a woman, you're a white woman, you're highly educated, you are whatever age you are, right? So no one in intersectional feminism, I think, thinks, oh, that category tells me everything, or even very much. The point is that it's way more complicated than that, because identities are intersecting.
I agree, but the way that it's practiced, it's sort of presumed that white males are privileged and they should listen.
Well, some white males are privileged in some
aren't.
ways, but some are working class, some are not able-bodied, some have PTSD and benefit from trigger warnings.
You rarely hear about those men in the gender studies textbook.
Well, I don't know. I teach feminist philosophy. I feel like I talk about that, and I don't think I'm an exception at all. So I'm going to stop for a minute, for at least a minute.
All right.
Somebody else.
Who else?
Hi, thank you for coming to speak with us. So you talked a lot about free speech and safe space. Whenever I hear free speech advocates speak, they seem to forget the Schenck versus U.S. 1919 ruling, in which Congress has a right to prevent speech.
Go a little slower.
Okay, yes. So they seem to forget the Schenck versus U.S. 1919 ruling, in which Congress has a right to prevent speech, and that speech is unprotected if, quote, words are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger. This is why hate speech advocates, such as that of Milo's, can be stopped, and when it isn't, people want a safe space away from these individuals. My question for you is, why does it concern you so much that these people have safe spaces? And why does it offend you guys so much that, or you and your followers, that these people have safe spaces?
I didn't hear every word, but I think you were asking me, I couldn't really hear the quote. You quoted a law about...
Like the right... Okay, so here, I'll quote it again. The Schenck versus U.S. 1919 ruling, and this is to go with the First Amendment, which says, if, quote, words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger, Congress has a right to prevent that speech, and that speech is unprotected.
Well...
That is a court ruling.
What you want to do is to go by the Supreme Court. The more recent rulings, the court has ruled in the direction of allowing you to a very, very wide range of speech, including hate speech. Hate speech is constitutional, including, that Baptist church where they go to funerals and scream, hateful things to people who are burying their sons or daughters who were killed. That was the most recent court ruling. And what I would advise you to do is go and read the arguments, because we have a tradition of allowing people to say almost anything, because we don't set up committees who decide who can say what and who can't. They do make some rules. You can't threaten people. You can't libel them. You can't print, child pornography. You can't scream fire in a theater. But outside of that, you can, Nazis in America, they're free to speak.
So
now, I think, I'm Jewish. I don't like to hear Nazis speaking.
Yeah.
They frighten me. The very idea, it frightens me and depresses me at every level that such people are around. But you know what? I think you let them speak, and then you defeat them. You defeat bad speech with good speech.
So on
but
the other
if you
hand,
silence them, or you turn them into free speech martyrs, it's useless. It doesn't work.
so if my friend wants a safe space because she doesn't want to hear this hateful speech, why does it offend you so much that she has that safe space?
Well, she doesn't have nobody. I'm not saying anybody should ever be forced to hear them. You just walk away. I mean, what's happened on many campuses, for example, the campuses where they came at Oberlin, at Georgetown, where they came with protests and jeering and interrupting. They didn't have to come and hear me. They didn't have to, nobody has to go and hear Milo. But they come and because they don't want other people to hear it. So that's different. If your friend wants to feel safer, I don't think I would attend a lecture by a Nazi. I'm also very upset by people. I have been to Israel many times. I have many friends there, and I'm very frightened by people that depict Israel as some kind of criminal nation, and I would not want to hear that. It would be distressing to me. So I wouldn't go. I just wouldn't go.
Anybody else? Can you pass? Right behind you, the row right behind you, to the left. That's fine.
Hi, thank you for coming. So I have two questions. One of them is a bit more direct. I'm just wondering, so you identify as a feminist. I'm wondering what your definition of feminism is.
My definition, there are different schools, but I, in my writing, have made a distinction between equity feminism and gender feminism. An equity feminist is someone who wants for women what she wants for everyone: fair treatment, equal liberty, equality, before the law. This is the classical tradition that comes to us from the European Enlightenment. Fair treatment, no discrimination. There is another school of feminism. I've called it victim feminism or gender feminism. I use the phrase gender feminism because the gender feminists believe that it's much more complicated. There's what they call a sex-gender system, and that every institution in the society bears the impress of patriarchy. And so it's not enough just to change laws and give women more opportunity. The system itself has to be overthrown. I just don't find this a convincing analysis of the United States. I think that equity feminism is a great American success story. And I think that women have basic equality. It's not that we don't face problems. Everyone faces problems, and women as a group have special challenges. But we have opportunity. The doors have been opened. And so I don't see that we need to continue calling American society patriarchal and oppressive. It's just not. So is it now? If you ask women in the United States, are you a feminist? You ask the average American, are you a feminist? I've seen polls. The most recent was a U.gov poll. I think 25% of people associated with that. Majority did not. Vox, the website Vox, they have a research apparatus, and they found about 16% of people. The recent one that was done by, I think it was the Pew Foundation, they asked people, why aren't you a feminist? And they gave various reasons. Some said that it was, not too many, but some said because it was too anti-male, and some, I don't know, they had other reasons. They were too angry. That wasn't the majority just thought that it was too extreme. But then they asked them, well, do you believe in equality? And they said, yes. So people say, oh, people are feminists and they don't know it. Yeah, they are. They're equity feminists. They're not gender feminists. So I think the majority of people are equity feminists in the United States, but they have not bought into this radical view that we have all of this deeply, embedded sexism. So that's how I would define it.
Anybody else?
Thank you. Ooh.
Can you just pass it to the closest person right behind?
I don't need a mic, so it's okay.
All right, go for it. All right.
So I'm going to quote you first. So you said intersectionality is not a good depiction of the United States. You said that the United States is not a matrix of oppression, and that we should focus on our common humanity instead of our differences, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me give you a little bit of statistics. 1 in 1,000, you have, okay, 1 in 1,000, that is the likelihood of a black man dying from stop and frisk, or a black person dying from stop and frisk. 1 in 6,500 is the likelihood to die in a car accident. So you are more likely to be killed as just for being black than to die in a car accident. So then how can we reject the proxies for discrimination in determining the justification of, or the idea of workplace discrimination or feminism in general in terms of your equity versus gender feminism stance?
As I said, the equity feminism is connected to classical liberalism. And what would we do in a liberal society? We would look at a problem like that And it's not, if you look at African American young men and you look at the incarceration rates, or you look at education. And just as men are behind women, black men are behind among men, and very, very far behind. And
Why do you think that is?
I think that our educational system is failing them.
Why do you think that is? Why do you support that?
What? Oh God, don't talk to me
Why
about
do
that.
you think that the educational system is failing our black youth?
I think it's a very complicated problem, and there's not a simple answer. And here's what I would recommend. There's the standard answer, that it's institutionalized racism, and that's certainly part of it. But I would advise you to listen to other scholars besides those that tend to be represented in the intersectional literature. There is Glenn Lowry, an economist at Brown University. No, wait. Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter. These are two African American scholars, and they have a podcast called. Lowry has a podcast called Blogging Heads, and he brings in dissident voices from the African American community to talk about these. It's not what you would hear from Black Lives Matter. They're kind of opposed to it. They sympathize with certain aspects of it, but they don't like the overall analysis. And what they would tell you, it is partly economic deprivation, but it's also partly cultural. It's partly the disintegration of the black family, and this appears to have a far more serious impact on all boys. It appears that if you come from a single parent home, usually it's the mother, it has a more serious impact on the son than the daughter. The daughter tends to see the mother as a role model, hardworking, and the son drifts. And this phenomenon, there's a lot of literature that this is especially marked in the African American community. So that is not, that's different from a simple explanation of segregation. It's more complicated. And that's what Lowry would say, that's what Glenn Lowry would say, and McWhorter, and Stephen Carter. I mean, there's a whole group, and I don't think they're heard. Anyway, just as I'm a moderate feminist, there are moderate civil rights activists and scholars that would dispute the intersectional analysis.
That wasn't my question. Let me rephrase, let me requote you. You said we need to focus on our common humanity. Correct? That's what you said.
Right.
So, to focus on our common humanity, we must first focus on what we see as human. 3/5 compromise. Black people are not seen as fully human. Now, currently, we've created a system of slavery within the penitentiary system, correct? And so that is
Not correct. Not correct.
yes,
Not correct.
How can we focus on our common humanity when not all people in America are considered equal?
Well, there may be. Wait. Let's take this step by step. The system of incarceration and the number of people we have in our prisons. Right now, you have liberals and conservatives that realize it's a problem. It is now a primary focus of reform, and many groups are working on it, trying to. Implicating the war on drugs and trying to find out what have we done that we have this kind of numbers of incarceration. And yes, disproportionate numbers of people of color. We have to address that. So, but then to turn around and call it slavery, there are a lot of people in jail because they're dangerous. There are a lot of people in jail because they murdered people and they beat up people and raped people. You wouldn't deny they should be in jail, would you?
A lot of people are in jail for petty thefts. A lot of people don't even get the chance to get to jail because they're killed on the spot. Why is Brock Turner given 6 months, cut in half to 3 months for raping a woman? But I know black people that are in jail right now for stealing a backpack and had 6 years.
Well, this is why I would urge you, why I think there should be a balanced, informed discussion. Because one of the things I heard from Professor Lowry and McWhorter, they have looked at the data and said that if you take like the number of people who are shot by police, they looked at it. They tried to find evidence that there was this massive evidence of racism, and it was a mixed picture because a lot of white people are shot by police, and black people are stopped more. But in terms of shooting, this was what they were presenting. Now, I'm not an expert in that area. I study women's history, women's studies and gender studies and education. But when I listened to them, I thought, I didn't know that. Now, I don't know if they're right, but neither do you.
Oh, I do.
Well,
I do.
yeah, you already.
All right. Where's the microphone? Is it out there
Hi.
still?
So I was wondering, I watched a couple of your videos where you spoke at other universities, and I was wondering what you thought about the term that many feminists use, empowered women empower women, considering that I watched a lot of your videos, and a significant portion of it had to do with criticizing safe spaces and trigger warnings, which a lot of people find empowering.
We'll do trigger warnings, and then we'll do. Do you mind if I do microaggression instead of safe space? No. Okay. Several psychologists have tried to find evidence that they're effective. And I think it was Richard McNally at Harvard, a psychologist. He looked at the data on trigger warnings and just couldn't find any evidence that this was effective. If people are traumatized, they don't know what's going to trigger them. It's unpredictable. And one of the worst things you can do is completely insulate them from the world. That if someone's traumatized by something, you kind of gradually give them little by little exposure. You don't isolate them. The other thing that Richard McNally said is that a lot of people have traumas and don't get PTSD. There's something called post-traumatic growth. It's not always that you're disabled, psychologically shattered. People are very resilient. So what he found was that this was actually a political phenomenon. It was not anything. He could not find data that showed trigger warnings help people.
Did this
Now,
researcher
last week,
experience something traumatizing?
What?
Did this researcher experience a traumatic situation? Have you experienced a traumatic situation?
A tragic situation?
Traumatic in order to know that it wouldn't bother you?
I don't have to talk about my own experience to know.
That other people don't need this?
Look, whatever I've experienced, I would want to know if that, maybe it's just me, maybe this is my reaction, and maybe other people are different. So you do want to have someone to look at a representative sample of the population and see what's going on. What he could not find, he doesn't rule out trigger warnings. He just said there's no evidence that these are helping people. Now, as a professor, I never gave trigger warnings. It was before that time, and I look back, I can't imagine it. But if someone, I think it would be up to us. I think students, if you are easily triggered or something, you could tell the professor. If you see what we're going to study, you say, I'm not going to be in class that day. I of course, would understand that. I hope every professor would. But
Okay.
if you have to think about everything on your syllabus, and am I going to upset someone? That's really going to undermine education.
So you should only think about some things on your syllabus.
You shouldn't. What are you saying?
You said you should think about some things, but
I think about teaching healthy people, and which I assume most people are. And if someone's not, they should let me know. But if look, your life is not going to come with a trigger warning. When you get out of this campus, there will not be trigger warnings. Huh? No, it's not. It's not. It's a very unsafe space.
You are in a safe space.
don't you want safe spaces for free
Safe
speech?
space for reason, for debate, for open discussion, and you don't. If colleges change its mission from pursuing truth, and it turns into protecting feelings, it will have lost its reason for being. Since the time of Socrates, the purpose of a university was for debate, exchange, and to be challenged and to be made uncomfortable.
All right, it's almost 8:30, so let's get a couple more in.
So you want to create safe space for free speech on college campuses?
No, I want a safe space for debate, for reason. That's the purpose of
Okay, that's
education.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Huh?
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
I have no problem with, as I said, if a student has a problem, tell the professor, and hopefully they're compassionate, but I do not think it should be a practice. I think it could be a form of censorship. That everything you do, you have to worry that, and there are so many areas where people could be traumatized, and how
Yeah, that's true, and that's what trigger warnings are accounting for.
this is, it's almost as if I don't understand this. I really don't.
10 years ago when I was teaching, I would just give students maybe a heads up. We were talking about pornography, we were going to watch something that was really graphic. Somebody might have religious objections to that. I said, heads up. This is how many, if you aren't comfortable, you can leave or not attend. That's what a trigger warning is. It's not censorship.
No, but I'm okay.
Hi, Ms. Hoff. First, I want to say I think you gave a terrific lecture tonight. I think you're being asked actually the wrong kinds of questions here. I think what you're getting at with some of these more pointed questions you've been asked is, in politics nowadays, we've reached a point where we're trying to more, like, you have one side of the aisle which is including for all these individual circumstances, because nobody's doubting these circumstances are sad. In the case of, like, some of these people over here, some of those circumstances we've heard are very tragic, and we're not denying the fact those are sad. But, however, I think where your specialty comes in is you're more of a policy speaker. And I want to ask you a question, two questions based on that. First off, do you think as we progress in the political world that we should tend to lean more towards the individual experiences that we can kind of pick out through like various media outlets, or should we continue to view it as more like statistical graphs that we can like, put up on a nice computer in Excel or in Minitab in that regard? That would be my first question for you. And second one is about the gender pay gap. I understand what you're saying about the earnings gap and where you're going with there. But I think we're all sort of diverging from the true question which is should the government be enforcing various corporations to pay women the same as working men while they're on maternity leave? I tend to lean more towards the free market system in that, but I just wanted to get your input on where we go from that standpoint.
Yeah, the first question about policy, when you're making a policy, you're making a law, you have to go by statistics and sort of find out what is true, across the population, and we have limited resources. So if you want to understand a problem, you want to understand it is how extensive is this problem, and how serious is it, and what can be done. So that's to me is just good, the best practice. Now, is it always possible to get good data? No, it's hard, but you try. And as far as companies, I kind of agree with Claudia Golden, this Harvard economist. She's a feminist economist, but she does not think that it's, the wage gap can be explained by, unscrupulous employers, cheating women. It's for other reasons. It's men and women are different. They have a somewhat different relationship to the workplace. And what do you do about it? And she thinks that we have to be very careful about mandating that companies do things before we're understanding it. And she wants kind of a piecemeal. I mean, a lot of companies need women. They want to keep women. And so there's a lot of experimentation with things like telemarketing and letting women, have a shorter work week and so forth. I think I would say if you want to help women, one solution for it's more part-time jobs. A lot of women, when they have children, there are very good studies. The Pew Research Center has done a lot of studies about preferences, what are women's preferences. And there's a European economist, I think she's British, Catherine Hakim, has studied in Western Europe women's preferences. And it turns out if you ask women, what is your ideal life situation? A large majority of women will say they would like to be married and when they have children to work part-time. 20% of women want to work full-time. There's, hard-driven careerists, and about 20% don't want to work at all. So, those were just the preferences of women. They find this over and over again. So I would think, as a kind of utilitarian, we would want policies and try to find a way to give people what they want. And so I would think more, for mothers, a lot of mothers do want to, there are not that many women that don't want to work at all. They want to stay in and maybe get back into the market full-time when their kids are a little older. So I would look for policies that women could have professional careers, but working part-time.
Right.
So that's one area.
So you're basically encouraging people, would you say more encourage them, like, when we talk about change and social change, I don't know where I fall on that spectrum. Certainly there can be some that's made. Would you say we should be more encouraging people to go into more of the private sector, like found a company, found a charity in the private sector? Should we benefit people? Because I'm in a poli-sci class right now, and what I've learned is basically our government inherently is not founded to certainly raise one group up while not helping another. I would tend to lean that way. It's not structured that way. Some would argue it's because it was founded by white men or whatever, but would you say we need to be more pushing people, make that change in the private sector rather than, looking towards the government, which is inherently, blocked off by all sorts of regulations that we, the people, have put in place? Would you say we should encourage people to, more pursue that changes in the private sector rather than the public government?
Here I just have my opinion, and it's probably because when I'm at this conservative think tank, I'm not really that conservative. I'm still a registered Democrat, partly because it's the family religion. I didn't have the nerve ever to disappoint my parents and be a Republican. They couldn't handle that. But having been at AEI, and I just learned a lot more about the value of the free market and what it's done to alleviate poverty in this country and around the world. It's, again, without economic freedom, you get poverty, and you usually get very serious oppression and cruelty and all serious pathology. So I do see the value in the free market, but there have to be protections, obviously. So it's always, we have to work out that balance.
It's about 8:30, so let's try two more before we get kicked out.
Hi, so I've seen a lot of your work, some of your videos, I've read some of your things, and you call yourself a factual feminist. You present a lot of facts. You believe that a lot of oppression and inequality has been righted, but one thing I really wonder about is I feel like there's a lot that still needs to be done, and one thing I haven't heard you talk about that much is cultural issues like sexual objectification, catcalling, things like that, and I wonder what your stance is on that, because as a woman, I feel like that is something I've experienced, and I feel like many other women have, but I haven't really heard you talk about that, and you talk about how we have overcome some oppression, but I feel like there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
When it comes to something like sexual objectification, all that I can tell you is that not all women agree, and that there was a time in feminism, and maybe you study this in your classes, but there was a kind of a battle in feminism in the late 80s, and there were sex-positive feminists, and there was another school led by Catherine McKinnon, Andrea Dworkin, that really took a pretty negative view of sexuality and viewed women as victims of male dominance. And I think McKinnon just thought sexuality was dysfunctional in our society, in this patriarchal society. There was a whole other group of feminists that opposed this and that spoke out again. People, I think it's Janet Haley at Harvard and Wendy Kaminer, and there were popular writers that were challenged, Camille Paglia, of course, who were pro-sex feminists who believed that saw women as enjoying their sexuality, women as liberated as men, and they didn't mind, if women could enjoy sexual objectification, could enjoy that it wasn't for them. It was not a problem. So I think my answer to you is that not all women agree on this, and when you talk about catcalling, that is a problem. It can be very annoying. It depends. There are many different ways in which this happens out on the streets. But there have been some feminists that say, well, we should criminalize it, and men should be arrested for it. That's a policy for arresting a lot of poor men, because this happens more. I know if Washington, D.C. is typical, there's a park. Anytime anybody walks, even I walk by it at my age, and the men make comments and things, and they are homeless men. And and so you've got women walking through there, and they're screaming things and saying things. These men are saying things. And these women, are dressed for success. And these men are homeless men that are saying these things. And that's where I see most of the catcalling. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do about that?
I've been catcalled. I've been objectified by men of all races and colors.
What do you mean by objectified?
Catcalled. That's objectification. I'm seen as my body, not as a human being, and for something more than what I am on the outside.
I worked on Wall Street, and I was catcalled by men in business suits. So, that's not just a homeless men thing. That is men across the board.
Well,
and there's no sex-positive feminist who's not going to make the distinction between enjoying objectification on your own terms and enjoying it all the time. That's just not the case.
Well, I mean, of course, no one wants to be. Well, you want to be treated as a human being, yes.
That's a question. Yeah.
But who opposes that?
You're contradicting yourself. That's the problem.
How? Well, who opposes what you say? What did I say that made you thought? I mean, I don't.
Some women love sexual objectification.
Well, no, some women don't mind being catcalled. Sometimes it's nice. If you, I mean, look, there are ways to do it. If somebody walks by and says, hi, beautiful, it hasn't happened in a while, but, there are pleasant ways.
I've never been with a black girl before. I mean, personally, when I'm walking to my car and man says to me, that's a nice pair of legs, where'd you get those? I feel threatened. Honestly. That's why we have doctors. That's why we have all this high incidence of rape and sexual assault, especially on this campus that feels so safe.
I actually have a question about rape.
Wait, were you rushing to extremes?
So you kind of.
It's past 8:30. Let's do one more.
Really quick.
One more.
So you kind of mentioned this briefly in your talk, and you've mentioned in some of your videos the 1 in 5 number, and you kind of discredit this. I'm just a little bit confused as how you refute this, even though it's been proved time and time again on college campuses across the nation. And I think here on Bucknell's campus, it's actually closer to 1 in 3. So I'm just confused as to how you discredit this, even though it's something so tangible.
If you look at the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is sort of the gold standard, no-nonsense crime study, and they have studied sexual violence on campus, they come up with a very different number. They get something like, I think, 1 in 50. It's too high.
For what?
For rape on college campus.
I'm talking about sexual assault.
They actually include sexual assault. If someone touching, some kind of physical assault.
1 in 50 women on college campuses have been sexually assaulted.
That is what they find.
But that's not.
Okay, now wait. Now, these are cases, a criminal, physical, sexual assault. They find it's a fairly low number. Now, other groups who do studies find 1 in 4. But when you look at those studies, what you find is that they tend not to ask a representative sample. They just, they'll do like a study, a telephone study, And they'll call people at one campus or two campuses. They'll choose people on those campuses, and they don't do it across the board. Or so they don't necessarily have a balanced sample. They often have very vague definitions. So they'll ask questions. They don't ask, were you assaulted or were you raped? They'll describe situations. And some of the situations are definitely, I would count them as assault, but others are vague. They'll say, have you ever had sex when you were drunk? And that, when you were incapacitated or when you didn't want to, but you'd had alcohol. Now, if you're incapacitated, yes, and someone had sex with you, but if you are drunk, that would depend. And so they have sort of vague definition. And they will also include an assault, everything from controversial, rape to unwanted kiss.
So are you saying that an unwanted kiss is not considered sexual assault?
It could be. There are situations where it could be. You would have to ask the person. Now, they do ask the women. They'll say, why didn't you report it?
If I kiss you right now, would that be sexual assault?
That would, yeah. It would be unwanted, but it's not the same as rape.
No.
But
Nobody's saying sexual assault is rape. Sexual assault is sexual assault. Rape is one kind of sexual assault.
right, but when people hear sexual assault, they tend to think it was that you were violated.
We're talking about facts. You should be okay with that. The definitions of definition.
All right, let's be clear. So let's be clear on the definition, and then you ask women, and when they do, you feel you were criminally, sexually assaulted. When the Bureau of Justice Statistics does ask it, and they ask, they get a lower number. On campus, you get a higher number, but I think they don't ask a representative sample, and I think that the questions are often vague. However, it is not my view that there isn't a problem. I think there is a breakdown in two ways. I think that if what some of you were saying and others tell me, I don't see it in the data, but I do hear the stories, and I think there's some kind of, I think there's probably a culture of binge drinking in which people act out in horrible ways. And I think if campuses were serious about this problem, they would go after the binge drinking. It's the drinking culture where most of these things happen, but they don't go after that.
So it's a woman's fault how we're being drunk.
I said it's every.
Because then we can make our own choices.
I think it's every. I think that on the college campus, that if there is this, all of this outrageous behavior, it's the culture of drinking and.
Sexual assault has happened in almost any imaginable context. It's not always sexual assault and drinking.
No, of course it can happen, but on the campus, I think the two are connected.
I just think it's kind of like to say that almost every single university does their own independent study and found similar numbers to the national average of 1.5. So I'm just a little bit confused as to how, if each university is collecting those numbers, how are you saying that's wrong? They're all online.
People have to look. You just have to look. Just look at the studies. And what I think has happened, I think there's now hysteria.
She didn't interrupt you.
I think that I just want to warn you about something, which is that there was a time in the 80s where people became convinced that there was an epidemic of abuse in daycare centers, and there was a kind of contagion of panic, and there were statistics that parents were reading that at one point that 50,000 children disappeared off the streets and were abducted and so forth. And finally, a reporter at the LA Times checked these statistics and found that it was actually abduction of children was a very rare crime. And what they were describing in these daycare centers, there was panic around children that wasn't borne out in reality. But people began believing it and believing it. And I think I see on campus some signs that we're in a kind of panic, a moral panic, and people are getting worked up. and there is, in any of these panics, there's some element of truth. There were crimes, but then it gets built up and people become carried away. And that's just a dangerous, bizarre thing to happen, and I think it's happened on our campus.
All right, we should probably wrap up because it's about 8:40 or 10 minutes over. But
How did Donald Trump get elected? Feminism has, it's healthy. Well, it's not healthy. It's not healthy, right?
How did
How did a man with these sexual women get elected?
I think they've been pretty. I don't think people elected him because he is that. I think they elected him because they thought that if you look at the results of studies of the voters, there were a lot of people that just especially in the Rust Belt that felt that maybe he could help them and that their problems were not addressed by the Democratic Party.
Do you think those people would claim to be equity feminists, but not necessarily feminists? How do you think in that way, kind of equity feminists sort of solve them? That doesn't really, speak to the issue, because certainly you can't be you spoke of yourself as a moderate feminist, right? You couldn't be a moderate abolitionist or a moderate suffragist.
Yeah, what's wrong with being a moderate feminist? Do you think you have to be a radical?
But social change is more radical thoughts, right? I'm sure that Harry B. Stowe would have met with congratulations.
There have been, the civil rights movement was made up of, there were moderates and there were radicals.
I mean, Martin Luther King was told, like, you've got to take it easy. You're getting on the nerve of these people. You need to make the cause seem more appealing. Do you think maybe this equity feminism is sort of soft feminism that's appealing to the many, but truly changes, social changes won't come out of that? So,
look, if you want social change, you have to make sure it's change for the better. And I just don't see evidence right now that within feminism that the radicals are pushing us towards a more humane society. I think that this demonization of males, and I think what's happened on campus with heterosexual males is that what's happening to them is what used to be done like to homosexuals. People would, they were pathologized, their sexuality was sort of viewed, as dysfunctional and pathological, and I think we're doing that to heterosexual males in this society. That there's a demonization of males.
But your sources that you primarily cite are Twitter, Tumblr, and so on. I'm not hearing you cite current academic feminism. You cite Twitter and say academic feminism is garbage.
I didn't say it was garbage. I
said
said women's studies.
Full of antics, extreme.
Yes, I'm talking about that. I was talking about social media and the activism. The actual scholarship, if you look at the textbooks, you do find a lot of advocacy statistics, and you do not find a place for classical sort of moderate arguments. They are dismissed as passé. The new thing is intersectional feminism, and classical equity feminism is dismissed. And I've seen.
So are you gonna keep interrupting our speaker? Is that how this is gonna? Because how many progressive professors are? I think it's like 80%. I could never conduct myself in the classroom the way you've conducted yourself tonight. It's. One more, Bridget.
Conservatives would conduct themselves much more respectfully.
Where's the microphone? To Bridget, and then we're done.
Can you give a white male question?
Oh, I do like your hat. I do like your hat.
So I just wanted to ask, what do you say to the fact that hate crimes are on the rise and white supremacists and other fascist groups have gained popular support because of the rise of unabridged, unchallenged, and far-right hate speech? Do you view this as a problem? And if so, what is your solution?
Yes. Well, if hate crimes are a problem. Hate crimes are terrifying. Now, the data that I saw is the primary focus were Jews. That, you know, people, swastikas and attacks on synagogues and the truth. And yes, even last week I read there were bomb threats to synagogues, and it's terrible. But the way to stop that is, first of all, that arrest the people. And if you see it increasing in the society, then you find where are these ideas coming from, and you defeat those ideas with better ideas.
So what do you tell a Nazi? What do you say to a Nazi? Argue with them.
Well, if I were to talk to them and I meet them, I haven't met them that I'm aware of, I would try to find out what they believe and why they believe it, and what based on what facts, and then try to correct their misunderstanding and their twisted views.
Okay.
What would you do? Punch them? Would you punch them? Interesting. That's what we were talking about in Portland, and there were a lot of people initially that thought you should punch Nazis, and I think that when you punch someone for their views, you're not just punching them, you're punching civil society.
I mean, they would rather kill you based on you being a Jewish person, so I guess punching is kind of bad.
Well, would you punch a child molester?
Yes!
Why? I would call the police and have him arrested. You can't. I mean, would you? So then, what you believe in?
All right. Let's wrap this up. Let's thank Christina for coming. Let's wrap this up. This can't go on all night. Thank you guys for coming.
I still have a microphone. I can still talk. I was given this, so.
Bridget, can you come up and ask
play.
Christina your question in person?
Yeah.
So this doesn't keep
okay.
going and going and going.
Why do you think you're facing so much opposition on college campuses?
Oh, I mean, why they come and protest and so forth?
Even this is opposition. We didn't protest.
No, this is fine. You came to argue. This is the old days. I've been doing this, and this is the old days. People would come and we would bicker and argue, and that's fine. You didn't interrupt. You didn't scream, and you didn't, there were people that have come with paint and all sorts of, you didn't do that. This is fine. And this is the way it should be.
All right, Bridget, real quick.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've kind of seen through your talk that you have this problem with kind of like radical protest and radical ideologies that you feel are detrimental. But I think sometimes throughout history we've seen that the only way to make positive change is through radical movements. And somebody that I would cite, for example, is like Michael Collins in, Ireland, who was fighting British oppression, and his ideas were viewed as radical. So I think what I'm wondering is that do you really believe that the best way to ask for change is to ask politely? Because you can't ask your oppressor to give you freedom. You have to take it.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
I understand. I think there are times where you need a radical vanguard. The problem with campus feminism is that the radical is now, it's the center, it's mainstream. And they're knocking down doors that are open, because we are not an gender-oppressed society. We are a liberated society. So I think there's a time, and there is a tendency among radicals that you should be aware of. Yes, it's well known that the radical vanguard, sometimes things they're saying that seem crazy to society later were brilliant insights, and they brought the society along. But there's also another phenomenon. The French have a word, dérapage, I think it's, a falling, where radicals become the things they were originally opposed. They become the haters. They become the bullies, and when they get power. And I think there's a certain amount of that on the college campus. Increasingly, our campuses are dominated by the far left, and or liberals, and the conservatives aren't there, and there's more intolerance for libertarians, conservatives. They hardly have a voice. And within feminism, I just don't see why we need a radical fringe in a society where we're men and women are equal.
Have you ever thought about how much more successful you might be if you were
How much more successful I would be if I was a man?
Yes, I do all the time. I do.
You'd rather be a man?
No, I wonder how. I've had people tell me either you can choose between having a family or you can choose between having a successful career in Wall Street. And that would have never, questions would have never been posed to any other person except me. Like, why was I faced with two choices? Being successful or having a family?
Well, first of all, there are women that are very successful and have families, so it's not a given that you can't do that. It varies enormously. The other thing is that it's just such an odd way to think, to feel so embattled, put down. I mean, there's so many opportunities, and to have, it seems like you just have this, you just carry around this chip on your shoulder. I don't understand why. When I look at young women today, and I saw this in my college classes who had so many opportunities, the world was there to be times where women were held back, and now open doors.
But you must see how we still feel that way. You might not currently right now, or you might not have previously, but as women sitting here looking at you right now, telling me that we in our life still do feel that oppression, whether it's occasionally or all the time, we still feel it. It's still there. So to tell us that we should just see all these opportunities will make us see all these opportunities.
Yep,
to give us
see
the opportunity to not be oppressed, to work our way, to march, to speak our mind, and to allow ourselves to use those outlets to feel less oppressed. I don't get why that's so bad.
It just seems to me that someone that gave you a bill of goods to tell you that you're oppressed when you're not.
That's not, somebody is not giving me this bill of oppression.
They had to, because you're not oppressed. You're about. Look, individually you can have all sorts of problems. I can't, but as just because you're a woman, it's the opposite of oppression. This is a free society. It's an opportunity-rich society. And no, for you. To be at a college like this, you have to count yourself among the.
But a lot of us, there's a lot of oppression for many people that took them to get here. There still is oppression going on for people that are here, despite.
There's still struggles. There's still all sorts. We're human, and everyone has all sorts of things, terrible things in their lives. Men and women, we're in this together. Don't confuse the human condition with political discrimination. They're just different things. And where women are concerned, American society and most of Europe, we have broken down those doors. And there are vast parts of the world where there are patriarchies, there are violent patriarchies. One thing that worries me about some of the things I hear tonight, and it worries me a lot, is that it's a big world out there, and there are people trapped in such horrific situations. And I come to the college campus, and I hear these young women, some of the most blessed in human history, focused on how oppressed I am, and I'm so held back. You're not. But if you're typical of a liberal arts college, you are just full of opportunity. The world is full of opportunities for you, and yet it seems to me students in these, because of these gender studies classes, and they learn all of this, how they're held back and the world's rigged against them. They're not able to see the world and to reach out.
Let's get Bridget real quick, and then we'll wrap up. It's almost 9.
Sorry. So I recognize that, I've been very blessed with a number of opportunities. And one being that I am, in fact, at this school. But can you not recognize that you're blessed and still recognize others' oppression? I think that and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but what I'm sensing is that like just because one door is knocked down, it's the assumption that all doors are knocked down.
What
I think in some
what doors are closed to you?
I think arguably there aren't that many doors that are closed to me, but I think that there still are doors that are closed to other people. Now, please keep in mind that I'm really, really trying to be respectful because I respect your opinion. But I do think, though, that just because I have some doors that are open to me doesn't mean I can't see that there are doors that are closed to other people.
Right, I know, that's true, but then, well, I heard from other people about how they felt so held back, but you say you're not that.
I mean, like, I think in some ways, like, I've had the opportunity. I'm a Division I athlete here. I'm going to graduate school. I'm doing a lot of great things in my life, but just because I'm doing a lot of great things in my life doesn't mean I can ignore that there are other people that don't have these same opportunities.
Right, so what other people are you talking about now?
I think there are a lot of marginalized women, even in the Susquehanna community, that have been marginalized. I recently taught a GED class last semester in which a lot of white women are marginalized through their socioeconomic class and their lack of education. And regardless of the fact that I have had these opportunities, and even though we try to kind of limit ourselves down to these binaries, some of these women still face certain forms of oppression. And you're right, I'm lucky. I'm a lucky girl. But just because I'm lucky doesn't mean that everybody else is as lucky as me.
Everyone else isn't. That was my point. They aren't as lucky as you. And of the people who aren't as lucky as you, there are women and men, right?
True, but shouldn't we work to we work with radical ideas to try and equalize it for everybody?
No, you work with good ideas.
But couldn't good ideas be radical?
You work with good ideas. Some of them may be radical, but many of them may be not. And the radicalism could get in the way of solutions.
All right.
Thank you.
It's like 9 o'clock now.
No, I never said that. I never said that. Some women are very oppressed. Some women are very oppressed. In many parts of the Muslim world, there's structural oppression.
Going back to culture, and that's some people's cultures, right? And so your idea of oppression
All right.
might be somebody else's idea of oppression because you're not experiencing it.
All right, let's wrap this up and thank Christina for coming, finally. 45 minutes late. Thank you, guys. Thank you.